basically, once China got its initial outbreak at the start of 2020 under control, it's largely been able to stamp out any additional spread of the virus. And so there's been flare-ups here and there, but through mass testing and pretty stringent lockdowns, they've basically managed to quash every single outbreak. That's been threatened by the highly transmissible Delta variant. And so we do see, like over the summer months, there were a number of outbreaks in different cities around China. But each time so far, they've been able to get them under control through these measures. And vaccination campaign has been really successful in China. They've got around 80% of the population vaccinated, and they've administered, I think the latest was 2.2 billion doses in the country. A couple of regions are actually already starting to roll out booster doses as well, especially for those high-risk populations.
Many countries are moving towards a living with COVID approach, such as Singapore and Australia, but what is China's plan in the future?
Well, we don't see any indication yet that China is moving towards matching that kind of loosening of restrictions that we've seen in other countries in the region, which also took a pretty stringent approach towards stamping out the spread of COVID-19 or shutting down their borders to not have any imported cases.
But why do you think China is standing so strong on this stance of zero COVID when the rest of the world really is looking to the next step to almost move on with their lives with COVID?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, and I don't think I have a 100% accurate answer to give you. But I mean, one of the things that we can see is that within China's borders right now, people are sort of living their lives as usual because they have been able to quash any outbreaks of Delta that have come through. Whereas other countries maybe have not been as successful in doing that as we've seen over recent weeks. The other thing, too, that some of the health experts have pointed to is that they're still waiting to get the vaccination rate up even higher. And then we also have this issue of, is there waning efficacy from the vaccines? And do we need to start revaccinating those people who were vaccinated maybe in January or February?
What are the view of people like China's leading respiratory specialist, Zhong Nanshan? I understand he's been talking about this idea of whether or not China should be opening up.
Yeah, that's right. He gave an interview last week where he was basically saying that there's a couple of things that need to be balanced here. And one of them is that still at that time, having reached 80% vaccination coverage, we want to get up to 85% coverage until we can start thinking about this. But he was also pointing to the situation in the rest of the world where there's still rampant spread of the virus. And so it looks like, from where he's standing, those are two things that, that leadership needs to balance.
Now, has there been any inclination, any timeline given for eventually opening up for China? Particularly next year, there's the Winter Games, the Winter Olympics is being held in China, and all eyes will be on the country.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, they've already given their guidelines for those Winter Olympics, and basically they are not going to have any international spectators, similarly to what we saw in Tokyo. And then also there'll be a quarantine especially for those non-vaccinated athletes who are coming in. There are a lot of analysts who say, well, maybe after the Beijing Olympics, that's when China might start to relax some of those border controls. But I think right now, Chinese leadership itself, health authorities have not given that kind of indication. We did see we did see a speech that was given by China's head of their CDC, George Gao, and he was basically describing China's policy as a wait and see. And so essentially they're ready to reassess when the time comes, and they're kind of watching the dynamics, but no word yet on a timeline.
Now, you've been covering China's response to the coronavirus outbreak since early 2020, and you've really seen the strategy that they've put in place. Do you think their strategy has been successful?
I think it really depends on who you ask. China has certainly sought to portray itself as an incredibly successful actor in controlling the spread of the virus, minimizing death, minimizing disease burden. And certainly we can see that in the numbers after Wuhan was brought under control. However, there's certainly limitations to people being able to move in and out of China. When there are these stringent lockdowns, that does affect people's daily lives, even if it's just over a handful of cases at that time when those begin. So, I can see people taking two sides on this question. But one thing that analysts do say is that at a certain point, when your borders are shut to most foreign business people, then there is certainly going to be an economic impact down the line. So just like all of the other countries that are dealing with these issues right now, that will be something that China has to balance.
Yeah, no doubt they're the world's second biggest economy, so I guess this definitely comes into play. Simone, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks, Alkira.